Hello, and welcome to my YouTube channel, Reading the Little Blue Books out loud. Yeah, while stoned. In this video, we're going to do part 3 and the final part of Little Blue Book number 1088, titled The Truth About Mussolini, written by Miriam Allen DeFord, copyright 1926. So, we will do chapters 5 and 6. And a few excerpts from chapter 7, because chapter 7 is just a list of how a brief outline of the progress of fascism in countries outside of Italy. So I'll read you what the United States was doing in 1926. Okay, so we are going to go on to chapter 5 and 6. Chapter 5 is Napoleon Mussolini, and chapter 6 is the man himself. So let's see, chapter 5 is our next one. Napoleon Mussolini. There it is, chapter 6, chapter 5. All right, Napoleon Mussolini. Here we go. Mussolini's Napoleonic complex is extremely obvious. He never forgets that Napoleon, too, was born of humble parentage, had more or less radical affiliations in youth, and found his way to power through military glory. The seizure of Corfu was a particularly Napoleonic gesture. Complicated with this is a vision of himself as another Caesar, restoring the grandeur of that which was Rome. But principally, it is the Corsican whom he has in mind as his prototype. No close student of Mussolini's life can doubt that he has secret hopes of an empire far wider than Italy. Already, in his speeches to his followers, he discloses his conception of himself as an absolute monarch. The spectacle of force and discipline offered yesterday was incomparably grandiose and beautiful. I express my praise and pleasure. To his cabinet, he has proclaimed himself in the slogan first uttered by Roger Jacqueline, leader of the white peasants of La Vendée, in the French Revolution. If I advance, follow me. If I retreat, kill me. If I am slain, avenge me. It is the battle cry of a man obsessed by his prime importance to the universe. In April 1926 came the first open advance toward the proclamation of an Italian empire equal to the Roman Empire, or at the very least coextensive with the Mediterranean. It was foreshadowed by the insulting speech to Germany in February of that same year. Sailing in a warship, the Comte de Calvaire, and accompanied by a fleet of 15 other battleships, Mussolini paid an official visit to the Italian colony of Tripoli in northern Africa. Thus did Napoleon sail into the harbor of Alexandria, but the Italian's state was far the more regal of the two. The visit was timed for the end of the great Mohammedan feast or fast of Ramadan. The shop windows were crowded with gifts to be presented to Mussolini, prominent among them a gold scimitar reminiscent of the Arabic proverb, "Peace lies only under the shadow of the sword." The city was smothered in fascist emblems. Dressed in the uniform of a corporal, note the Napoleonic significance, Mussolini addressed the assembled Tripolians while airplanes hovered overhead and a 19-gun salute formally sounded only for princes of the blood. Was followed by 600 shots fired rhythmically from guns all over the city. His speech, translated into Arabic as he delivered it, was in part as follows. Our august and grandiose sovereign, note Mussolini's love for the word grandiose, whom God protects and the people love, has charged me to bring his salute to this land, which is forever Italian. My voyage must not be interpreted as a mere administrative act, but as it is an affirmation of the power of the Italian people, a manifestation of the force which originates in Rome and which extends from Rome to a glorious and triumphant littoral. Fascist Italian Tripoli, you represent here Italy, which is daily more prosperous and powerful. Rome carries the beacon lamp of strength to the shores of the African Sea. No one can stop our inexorable will. You understand me more for what I have not said than for what I have said. Only this language is possible in fascist style. As the trip progressed, his language became still more arrogant and threatening. At the ancient Roman city of Sabratha, 50 miles west of Tripoli, he wrote in the visitor's book, "To Rome of the past and the future." Arab tribesmen gave the fascist salute. A sheik presented the dictator with his fine Arabian horse with a silver ornamented saddle. Women fought for a chance to kiss his hand. His reception would have turned a cooler brain. In laying the cornerstone of the colonial emporium, an agricultural enterprise near the city of Tripoli, he proclaimed grandiloquently, "I am a mason. I have helped to build many substantial houses in my time, and that is one of the reasons the Italian people have commissioned me to rebuild the empire." On the way to the ruins of Leptis Magna, he drove his own car at such breakneck speed that one automobile, which was trying to keep up with him, turned turtle in a sand dune. And his very last word on leaving Africa were ominous ones. To the Italian officer stationed in Tripoli, he said, "No one knows when the moment will come which needs you. History waits for no man." The moment, in his own mind, was obviously the equivalent of the day of the former German Empire, the day when fascism, with Mussolini at its head, would by a magnificent gesture make an Italian lake once more of the Mediterranean. No wonder France was alarmed, with her interest in Monaco and Algiers. His return to Rome was in the nature of an ovation. The streets were thick with saluting black shirts. A newspaper correspondent reports that the crowds clapped and shouted so loudly that the sound reverberated like thunder. He noted also that Mussolini responded in his usual rigid and austere manner, a further Napoleonic commentary. Returning, he found himself in the midst of his ornate plans for the reconstruction of Rome in its ancient glory, as a sign and symbol to all the world. The actual work he has entrusted to Filippo Cremonesi, governor of Rome, and perhaps the most unscrupulous grafter in the fascist ranks. See Facts About Fascism. 5 years are given for the city to be restored to its condition under Augustus. The theater of Marcellus, the Capitol, and the Pantheon are to be surrounded by public squares with broad avenues leading up to them. Hundreds of humble homes have to be ordered destroyed and their inhabitants evicted to carry out this scheme. The Appian Way is to be once more what it was in the time of Caesar. To Bradford Muriel, an American newspaper executive, he stated, "We shall build more and finer steamships. We will have the finest and most luxurious trains from Naples to Rome. In another year, we will tunnel through 5 mountains in order to reduce the time from 5 to 3 hours." Meanwhile, Italy is staggering on the verge of a financial debacle, and 5 years from now may see Mussolini not but an unsavory memory. But Mussolini regards such contingencies no more than did Napoleon. Rome, vast, well-ordered, powerful, must again become the wonder of the whole world, and Mussolini must be the man to make it so. That's the end of chapter 5. I forgot what number we're on. Chapter 5. So let's start with chapter 6, the man himself. Boy, that didn't even take long for chapter 5, did it? Chapter 6, the man himself. It would take a trained psychiatrist and psychoanalysis combined properly to estimate Benito Mussolini. All predispositions and prejudices for or against fascism would have to be eliminated. All the fortuitous phenomena which have elevated him to his present position, all purely national characteristics, and even so, he would be a difficult problem. I have frequently heard it said, in calm judgment, that Mussolini is a paranoic. Mussolini is a paranoic. Strictly speaking, this is not true. The delusions of grandeur of the typical paranoid are delusions, though they may have some slight basis of fact. The victim imagines that he is possessed of vast wealth, is of noble lineage, etc. But the things Mussolini claims for himself are actual, however they may have been gained. He does exhibit the sulliness and austerity and the vanity which are marked symptoms of some forms of paranoia. But if he is suffering from this affliction, it is not sufficiently developed as yet to be apparent to the layman. In like manner, and with Miss Balbanoff's story of the clinic in mind, he has been diagnosed as a sufferer from paresis. But both his mind and body are not firmly under control to admit that thesis. No paralytic patient could calmly face an assassin, drive an automobile rapidly and safely, or live the disciplined life that Mussolini lives. The probability is that he is not insane at all, unless we extend the definition of insanity to include all the despots and world conquerors of history. If Napoleon was insane, if Julius Caesar was insane, so is Benito Mussolini, which does not mention that he is to be compared with either of these men in other particulars. But that his type of mind and his peculiar temperament are, strictly speaking, pathological, not even his admirers can very well deny. Only a glance at his brooding eyes, his jaw forced into aggressiveness, his whole gloomy and artificially rigid countenance, would suggest this to any student of psychology. Here is a man of whom one may say that originally he was an excitable, emotional being, physically a coward, with some artistic talent and much artistic feeling, indecisive and easily influenced, a fanatic and an extremist. Now, he is still these last, at the other end of the gamut, but events have compelled him to suppress his emotions into a mask of austerity, to play the brave and foolhardy hero, to desert literature and music for politics and war, above all, to make quick, immediate, and far-reaching decisions about himself and for others. It is possible so completely to transform one's outward nature, but at what a terrific cost to oneself. Mussolini dare not be himself, dare not let go. Day and night, asleep or awake, alone or in company, he must be the fascist dictator. He can have no personal contacts, no confidants, not even himself. Probably he never lets his mind deliberately dwell for a minute on his past. His gaze must be inexorably on the present and the future. His life is calendared and regularized to a degree that suggests a conscious effort never to let go for an instant. At 6 o'clock in the morning he rises and rides on horseback or in his motor around Rome. Funny, motor, car. His car around Rome. At 9, he is at the Palazzo Chigi. It's a weird pronunciation. Chigi, the seat for government, going over his mail and telegrams. At 10, he telephones the day's orders to the heads of various governmental departments. Then he reads the Italian and foreign newspapers until 11, when he dictates to his secretaries, or rather, as we have seen, hands them his drafts of letters to be written. From 11:30 to 1, he receives visitors, then goes home to his apartment in the Via Rosella to his lunch. Until 4 o'clock, he resumes his reading of news of the world, this time in his own library. At 4, he returns to his office and stays until 8 or 9 every evening in conference with the members of his cabinet. Not until then does he return home for dinner, and immediately afterwards he goes to his library again to read until after midnight. Apparently, he does not sleep well, perhaps for the same reason that Macbeth had insomnia. A man, no matter how heavy his burdens, does not live under so relentless a schedule unless he fears its relaxation. Undoubtedly, he is a very ill man. Twice it has been reported that an operation was imminent, and twice he has denied the rumor. And undoubtedly also nothing so galls him as to have his followers and the world in general know about it. The digestive troubles, which are all that he will admit openly, are, of course, common symptoms of many diseases, both physical and mental. This much cannot be denied, for at the many official banquets which he is obliged to attend, he eats only rice and milk. An old housekeeper named Caesarea supervises his household and feeds him simple meals of fruit, milk, rice, eggs, salad, and chicken, almost his complete dietary. He no longer drinks wine, coffee, or tea, and has stopped smoking in recent years. In other words, he lives the restricted life of a monk. It will be news to most readers that there is a Signora Mussolini. Mussolini's wife lives entirely retired from the world in which her husband dwells. She is a quiet housewife who has been in Rome only once since Mussolini became premier. She keeps her home in Milan for her two sons and sees her husband only once or 2 or 3 weeks when governmental business takes him to that city. There are 3 children. Whether they are all the present Signora Mussolinis, I have been unable to discover. So reserved, discreet, and even casual is Mussolini about his domestic arrangements. The 2 youngest are boys, Vittorio, 5 years old, and Bruno, 7. His favorite child is his daughter, Ida, who is 14 and attending school in Florence. She is said to be very like her father, both in appearance and in temperament. Recently, it was reported that a match was being arranged between her and the Crown Prince of Italy. Even little while, every little while, Mussolini concedes to the man he used to be some slight concession. He takes out his violin and plays where only his old housekeeper can hear, or he engages once more in some form of creative writing. A while ago, he started a play, a not very remarkable play about gypsies and about a young gypsy girl beloved by a young man and a middle-aged man. It was called Gentlemen, It Is About to Start. The stage call for actors when the curtain is about to go up. An American film producer heard of the play and offered Mussolini a large sum for its picture rights. But the premier was unable to accommodate him. He was stuck in the second act and has never been able to bring the play to a reasonable conclusion. There is some food for thought to the student of psychology, both in Mussolini's writing such a play and in his inability to finish it. There is something of the theatrical in all that he says or does. It would be interesting to know if he ever had aspirations to this stage. His far from graceful figure would have quenched them, if he had. Helen Dare, an American newspaper correspondent in Italy, says of him, his broad, thick shoulders, the round, ribbed torso reminded me of the peculiar development of the Esquimaux, or Eskimo, who go hunting in the Arctic seas, sitting in their kayaks, and get that sort of development, throwing their spears at the white whale and walrus. They're big game hunting. His powerful blacksmith arms making hammer-swinging gestures that bring his fists down with an emphasis that is an ultimatum and confirms his own decisiveness to himself. His strong jaw thrust forward and making his points in the intensity of his declamation, in a way that from my place below made his face strongly angular, and his head for all the world like a most modern cubist drawing in black and white. His challenging dark eyes glow like a pair of live coals in the far back of a dark cave under that bleeding brow. Always there is a suggestion of the primitive, the primordial fighting man in him when he is in action. Something of this fades when he is in repose, sitting in his automobile, walking from door to car, one of several in a group as I have seen him at different times. His legs perhaps diminish his impressiveness, but when he is in all swelled up with the energy of combat, in his oratorical mood, he surely stands out as a man apart, quite the man to disregard precedent and do things in his own way. Though the heavens fall and the charges of inconsistency rattle about his ears. Inconsistency is a mild word to fit the case, but Miss Dare is an admirer of Mussolini's. She never tires of telling how devoted to him are the Italian people, and it is true that he has caught the imagination of a considerable and turbulent section of the Italian public. Whether they would not as ardently devote themselves to some new leader, were Mussolini gone, is another question. Let us not forget our Shakespeare. The temperament of the lower class Italian has not changed very much, and the enormous throngs that follow Mussolini, the shouts and huzzas that greet him, may some day be the tribute of Mussolini's conqueror. As it is now, his power is particularly complete, or practically complete. If he were not rather a tragic and historic figure, says Professor William Y. Elliott of Harvard in the Forum for April 1926, one might liken him to Pooh-Bah in the McAdoo, with his load of ministries. Mussolini himself is Minister of the Air, Army, and Navy, and was Minister of, as well, of Home Affairs and Foreign Affairs until the Matteotti scandal shook him loose from the former of the two. But with the added burden of the premiership and of the rule of Il Duce to the fascists, he is really more like some Atlas trying to support and hold together the beginnings of the Italian empire that he hopes to create. Since that was written, Mussolini has also been made Minister of Fascist Corporations, representing 15 fascist associations, workers and employers, federations, workers and employers federations, agricultural, industrial, commercial, banking, transport, and artisan societies, and the professional classes. This new ministry was created on May 1st, which is no longer permitted to be celebrated by Italian labor, the birthday of Rome, April 21st, being substituted by all good fascists. Says Chester Rowell, well-known editorial writer of the bombastic birthday celebration of 1926 when Mussolini announced the restoration of ancient Rome. Standing under the arch of Constantine, Benito Mussolini, Caesar of the modern empire, celebrated the 2680th birthday of Rome. The 1000th birthday had been celebrated with great magnificence. The 2000th found Rome so far in decline that nobody noticed it. Now, with the 3000th only 320 years away, Mussolini is already preparing to be remembered at it. Perhaps it will be celebrated under his arch instead of Constantine's. That the fascist leaders in general, presumably including himself, are a bit vainglorious, Mussolini admitted in a speech in September of 1924. There are too many commanders and too many cavaliers. The fascists should take a pride in achieving their aims without reward. Certainly no one could have more offices and titles than El Duce himself possesses. However, he went on to say, he was quite satisfied with his bravos. Conceit and vanity and all. The newspapers allege that I am a prisoner of my bravos. I rebut this allegation, but at any rate, I would prefer to be the prisoner of my own bravos than of those of my adversaries. To the astute in such matters, it would seem that a bit of persecution mania is mingled with the prevailing ideas of grandeur which characterize the premier. But he endeavors, whenever possible, whatever may be his plans for the 3000th birthday of Rome, to disclaim an undue self-estimate of his own importance, and to appear to the outside world as a mere servant, an Atlas, if Professor Eliot prefers, bowed down under the burdens not of his choosing, ready to return to the hut from the palace. Only recently he ordered that no streets in Rome be named after him. Even this concession, however, he could not make without displaying his power by including in the veto the naming of streets after any other living person, and ordering the restoration of the old names in all cases where this command had been disobeyed. It is significant that his three favorite authors are said to be Machiavelli, George Sorel, the French syndicalist, and Nietzsche. There's something Nietzsche fell into that trap. There is something in the present aspect of Mussolini's life that suggests a conscious modeling on the teachings of all three. To a friend who asked him if he never read fiction, he replied, "I shall make my own life, my romance, and my masterpiece." A typically megalomaniac remark. A little later, said Milton Bronner, a newspaper correspondent, that is, a little later than his first youth, emotionally and sentimentally devoted to Heine and Carducci. He turned to the poetry, history, and drama of ancient Rome, and that is something worth remembering. It was not only a few weeks ago that he stirred Italy and worried the rest of Europe by his speech about Italy's destiny as a successor of imperial Rome. His passionate absorption of the deeds of the Caesars is bearing fruit. Such is the man who has stirred Italy to her depths, has agitated the whole civilized world, and is probably, since Lenin's death, the most striking national figure now living. And what is it that he has after all accomplished? To quote Chester Rowell again, to understand Mussolini and fascism, you must reverse every idea you have always taken for granted. You must enter a world where men walk on their hands, eat sunlight, and breathe water, and count twice two as 17. In other words, liberty is wrong, free government is undesirable, governments should not be elected by the people and do not depend on their consent. Citizens should obey not laws but orders. Education is a bad thing, except for the rulers. Workers should have low wages and employers small profits, and neither has anything to say as to the terms on which he will work or invest. And these are not the mere makeshifts of an emergency. They are permanent principles of right and truth, valid everywhere. Democracy and liberty are the chief evils of mankind, and it is a sacred duty to abolish them. The state does not exist for the citizens, but the citizens for the state, and they should be herded by someone able to seize the power for the aggrandizement of the state. That is fascism, the creation of Benito Mussolini, once an ardent internationalist, anti-militarist, and Marxian socialist. Someone has recalled a prospos of Mussolini, the story of an old Negro woman in the South who was freed by the Civil War. Several years later, it was pointed out to her how much better off she had been under slavery. In freedom, she had grocery bills and doctor's bills, rent to pay, and no security against old age. In slavery, everything was paid by her masters, and she was guaranteed against her old age. She agreed that in many respects, she was well off when she was a slave, and was quite badly off as a free woman. But, said the old woman then, turning to her mentor, but honey, it's the feelings. Yes, says the commentator, there are the feelings, and they can make slave food unpalatable and free crust delicious. Someday Italy will yearn once more for the feelings. And someday Benito Mussolini, too, may long for the days when he was ready to die for the workers instead of murdering them. Perhaps, involuntarily, he thinks about those days now. As a sick, lonely man, he plays his violin to himself in his library, stuffed with fascist newspapers. That's the end of chapter 6. Now on to chapter 7. And Chapter 7 is just a supplement, and it is a brief outline of the progress of fascism in countries outside of Italy. And the only one I'm going to read is the one that pertains to the United States. So, the United States, 1926, fascism. Besides the organizations of Italian fascisti, there is a North American fascist league made up of Americans. Another fascist association was founded in Omaha in 1923 by Edgar L. Fuller, former Kleagle of the Ku Klux Klan. At a luncheon of the Foreign Policy Association in New York in January of 1926, Count Theon de Revel, Thomas W. Lamont, and Otto H. Kahn spoke in fervent praise of fascism and Mussolini. As recently as May 2, 1926, an anti-fascist mass meeting in New York was broken up by the police bomb squad. The New York Herald Tribune said in July 1924, "Our own legislators have left some people asking whether a Mussolini would not be a valuable addition to Capitol Hill." The Ku Klux Klan and allied associations are, of course, closely akin to fascism. So true. And that is the end of Little Blue Book, number 1088, titled The Truth About Mussolini, written by Miriam Allen DeFord, copyright 1926. Thanks for listening. Join me in the next Little Blue Book.